He fell from the sky alone, a stranger on a world he didn't understand, tied by vines, surrounded by aliens, and led into a ceremony he never agreed to. But when she reached out her hand, with fear in her eyes and hope in her voice, everything changed. What began as survival became a bond that could unite two worlds, or tear them apart. This isn't just a story about an alien romance. It's about courage, connection, and the moment a human chooses to stay when everything tells him to run. If you are new here, then please subscribe this channel and show thumbs up by liking the video. Now let's move to this wonderful story. The sky broke open above him. Moran clutched the controls of his failing ship as it shook violently, sirens blaring in his ears and smoke rising from the control panel. His heart pounded in his chest. No signal, no navigation. He was falling, fast toward an unknown world, its surface glowing in shades of green and gold. There was no time to think, no time to call for help. Just a split-second choice. Aim for the clearing and hope for the best. The ship hit the ground with a force that knocked everything into darkness. When Moran woke, the world was quiet. His vision was blurry, but he could feel the soft tickle of grass beneath him. The smoke was gone, replaced by a gentle breeze that carried the scent of flowers and something strange, almost electric. As his eyes cleared, he saw shapes, tall, elegant figures with smooth skin the color of early evening skies. Their eyes shimmered like silver under the sun, and they wore long flowing robes that glinted with tiny lights. They stood in a circle, around him watching in silence. One of them leaned forward and spoke, but the words meant nothing to him. It was like music, beautiful and confusing all at once. Moran tried to sit up, but his arms were tied, softly, not harshly, with what looked like braided vines. They weren't pulling tight or hurting him, but they kept him from moving freely. Panic stirred in his chest. Was he a prisoner? Were they going to harm him? He pulled against the vines, but they held fast. Then something unexpected happened. One of the tall figures, wearing a golden sash across their chest, stepped closer and placed a hand gently on Moran's forehead. A warm, tingling sensation spread through his skin, and for a moment the fear faded just a little. The figure spoke again, slower now, as if trying to comfort him. Then, two of the beings untied his arms and lifted him carefully to his feet. He didn't resist. Somehow he sensed that fighting back would not help. The group began walking, and Moran had little choice but to follow. They moved through the strange terrain with graceful steps, leading him toward a structure in the distance. As they came closer, Moran's breath caught in his throat. The village was unlike anything he had ever seen. Towering spires of crystal stretched into the sky, shimmering in the sunlight. Gardens hung between buildings like bridges, full of floating blossoms and glowing leaves. Soft music echoed in the air as though the wind itself was humming. Colorful banners fluttered from high platforms, and everywhere he looked, more of the blue-skinned beings, the Silari, he would later learn, were gathering. Hundreds of them surrounded him as he was led toward the center of the village. Their eyes were full of curiosity, not anger. Some smiled. Others whispered to one another. Children peeked from behind robes. The crowd was growing larger by the second, and the air buzzed with excitement. In the heart of the village stood a wide stone stage that gleamed under the light of twin suns. Moran was guided to its center. The leader in the golden sash raised one hand, and a hush fell over the crowd. He spoke again, this time loudly. A small device near Moran's ear crackled to life. It must have been a translator, and suddenly, the words made sense. "The one who bridges has arrived," the voice said in his head. "The bond shall begin today." Moran blinked. "The bond?" he whispered to himself. "What bond?" Before he could even try to understand, someone began walking toward him from the edge of the platform. The crowd parted. Every eye turned to her. She moved like flowing water, elegant, smooth, and glowing in the golden light. Her skin was the same soft blue as the others, but it seemed to glow faintly, like moonlight. Her long hair floated behind her in silver waves, And her eyes were deep violet, glowing softly like dusk. She wore a robe made of threads that shimmered like stardust. In her hands she carried a small, glowing flower. She stepped in front of Moran and bowed her head. "I am Viola," she said, her voice soft and musical. "It is my honor." The crowd erupted into joyful cries. Bells chimed from unseen towers. Banners danced in the wind. But Moran stood frozen, his face flushed. He had just crashed here. He didn't know their ways, their customs. He certainly didn't understand why this beautiful stranger was standing in front of him like they'd known each other forever. The leader spoke again. "According to the ancient ways, the human shall bond with the daughter of the Solari. This bond shall bring strength to both worlds." Bond. Daughter. Strength. Miran's head spun. Was this real? Was this some kind of ritual? Was he about to be married? The translator buzzed again. Viola took a step closer. Her expression was nervous, not commanding. She wasn't forcing him. She was waiting. She held out her hand. "Your first duty," she whispered, "is to hold my hand." Everything went still. Miran's mouth went dry. He had flown through asteroid storms, escaped pirates, survived alone in dead zones. But this moment, this quiet request, shook him more than any danger ever had. He looked at her hand, then at her face. There was fear there, but also hope. Slowly, almost without realizing it, he reached out and touched her fingers. They were warm and soft and trembling, and then the sky exploded in light. Miran didn't know what to expect after the moment his fingers touched Viola's. The sky above had exploded in a shower of light, music filled the air, and the villagers, no, the Solari, cheered like something sacred had just begun. His heart was still racing and his mind struggled to catch up. All he had done was hold her hand. But here, that gesture seemed to mean everything. As the crowd slowly quieted, the elder in the golden sash stepped forward again. His voice was calm but strong, and the translator in Moran's ear hummed to life. "The first touch has been shared. Now before the twin moons cross, the bond must be made whole. 3 sacred rites must be completed before sunrise." Miran blinked. "3 rites?" he whispered, glancing at Viola. She gave him a small nod, though her expression was as uncertain as his. Clearly, she wasn't any more prepared for this than he was. The elder raised his arm and 2 younger Solari came forward, carrying something wrapped in soft blue cloth. They knelt before Viola and Miran and carefully unwrapped the object. It was a stone, smooth, round, and softly glowing from within like it held a tiny star. The elder placed it gently on the ground between them. "The first rite," the translator buzzed, "is the sharing of touch and trust. You must both keep your hands on the stone until its light fades." Miran swallowed hard. He wasn't used to rituals or traditions. He was a pilot, not a spiritual person. But something in the way Vela looked at the stone, half nervous, half hopeful, gave him the courage to sit beside her. She placed her hand on the stone first, her fingers steady despite the faint tremble in her shoulders. Miran hesitated only a moment before placing his hand beside hers. The moment his skin touched the stone, a gentle spark moved through his palm. It wasn't painful, just strange, like the stone was alive somehow. Their fingers brushed again, and Miran felt a laugh rise in his throat, quiet and unsure. To his surprise, Vela smiled and laughed too. It broke the tension between them, at least for a moment. Around them, the Solari began to hum a low, steady song. It wasn't loud, but it filled the space like air. The sound seemed to make time slow down. Minutes passed. Neither of them moved. The glow of the stone pulsed, steady and slow. Then something strange happened. Miran could feel Viola's heartbeat, not just in her hand, but inside his own chest. It was gentle at first, then stronger. He glanced at her and saw the same wonder in her eyes. They were connected, not just physically, but through something deeper. He couldn't explain it, but he could feel her fear, her curiosity, her quiet strength. And she could feel his. The connection wasn't frightening anymore. It was peaceful. Finally, the stone's glow faded and turned dark. The elder stepped forward again. "The first rite is complete," the translator said. Miran and Vila let go of the stone at the same time and sat back, both breathing harder than they had expected. The humming stopped, and the silence that followed felt just as powerful. But the moment didn't last long. Another object was brought forward. This time, a flat stone dish covered with a cloth. When the cloth was lifted, Miran's stomach growled. The plate held strange fruits that glowed faintly, seeds that shimmered like tiny stars, and something that looked like roasted meat with a blue glaze. It smelled amazing and completely unfamiliar. "The second rite," the elder announced, "is the sharing of life and nourishment." Vila picked up one of the glowing fruits and held it out to Miran. Her hands shook slightly and her cheeks colored in a way that reminded him of a sunrise. He took it gently and bit into it. The taste was unlike anything he'd ever had. Sweet, rich, and refreshing. He broke off a piece and offered it back to her. She took it, her fingers grazing his once again. This time the contact felt less awkward, more natural. They continued eating, taking turns offering and receiving. The crowd around them watched in silence. It felt less like being observed and more like being honored. Every movement, every glance seemed to carry weight. When the last fruit was gone, the elder nodded. "The second rite is complete." Miran wiped his hands on his robe, feeling his chest tighten. Not with fear, but with something else. Something softer. He didn't know what it was. Not yet. Then the final item was revealed. A folded cloth that shimmered like the night sky. When the elder unfolded it, Miran saw tiny lights inside it like stars caught in fabric. "The third rite," came the final instruction, "is the sharing of dreams." Morning arrived slowly, with golden light spilling across the village rooftops. Miran opened his eyes to the soft warmth of the glowing blanket and the peaceful sound of distant music drifting on the breeze. For a moment, everything felt calm. He turned his head and saw Vela still asleep, her face relaxed, a hint of a smile on her lips. The night had passed quietly. They hadn't spoken much after their whispered fears, but something had shifted. He didn't feel like a stranger anymore. He felt included, maybe even welcome. But peace rarely lasted long. The village began to stir, and the hum of voices grew louder. Miran sat up, rubbing his eyes. Vila did the same. Before they could speak, the crowd gathered again, this time more serious than before. The elder in the golden sash approached, his face stern, and behind him walked several others, each holding tall staffs topped with red crystals that caught the sunlight and scattered it like fire. Miran's stomach dropped. Something was different. This wasn't celebration, this was ceremony. "The rites have been completed," the elder said, the translator clicking on. "But to fully earn the bond and the trust of our people, the human must now face the trial of belonging." Miran stood up slowly. His muscles were sore from the crash and the journey through all the rituals, but his thoughts were sharper now. "Trial?" he asked. "What kind of trial?" The elder turned, pointing toward the horizon where dark hills rose in the distance. "You must enter the whispering forest and retrieve the heartbloom. It is a flower that blooms only under the light of the red moon. You must return before dawn, or the bond will not be honored." Vila gasped beside him. She reached out, gripping his sleeve. "The forest is dangerous," she whispered. "No one enters alone. It's filled with creatures and spirits that confuse the mind. I can talk to them. Maybe they'll choose another trial." But the elder had already raised his staff, signaling the crowd to silence. "This is our way," he said. "To bind a human and a Solari is to seek the blessing of the stars themselves, and the stars do not bless the fearful." Miran looked at the forest. It didn't look far, but the thick mist swirling at its edges made it hard to see beyond the trees. He had no weapons, no map, only a small bag the villagers handed him, filled with dried fruit, a flask of glowing water, and a silver token shaped like a leaf. He could say no. He could walk away. They wouldn't stop him. But when he looked at Vela, he saw the worry in her eyes and something else too. Faith. She believed he could do it, even if she was afraid. That belief gave him strength. "I'll go," he said, simply. The villagers began to hum, a low, steady song that felt like a goodbye and a prayer at once. As Miran turned toward the forest, he felt a light touch on his arm. Vila stood there holding a small stone pendant shaped like a star. "This is for protection," she said. "It's not magic, but it helped me once when I was lost." She slipped it into his hand, and for a second they didn't speak. They just looked at each other. Then she said, "You will not go alone." Miran frowned. But the elder said, "He said you must retrieve the heart bloom," she interrupted, her voice firm. "He didn't say how many feet could walk the path." Before he could argue, she turned and walked with him toward the forest edge. The moment they stepped beneath the trees, the world changed. The forest was alive, not just with sound, but with feeling. The air shimmered. The trees swayed as though watching them. Whispers curled through the mist. Soft voices that made no sense, but pulled at the edges of the mind. Miran shook his head, trying to focus. They moved slowly. The path twisted, sometimes disappearing entirely, forcing them to guess their way. Strange creatures watched from the shadows, some curious, some clearly not pleased. Vila stayed close, whispering calming words, sometimes singing softly in her language. It helped. The forest seemed to quiet when she sang. Hours passed. Or maybe it was only minutes. Time didn't feel normal here. At one point they came to a clearing filled with floating lights, and Miran stumbled, falling to his knees. The whispers grew louder, pressing into his thoughts like a storm. He heard voices from his past, angry, mocking. "You're not a hero. You're nothing." He felt doubt rise like a wave. But then Viola knelt beside him. She took his face in her hands and said firmly, "You are not alone. I see you, Miran. Stay with me." Her voice broke through the fog. He nodded slowly, stood up again, and together they walked forward. Finally, in a hollow surrounded by silver trees, they found it, the heart bloom. A single glowing flower, its petals bright red, opened beneath a shaft of moonlight. Miran stepped forward and carefully plucked it. The moment he did, the whispers stopped. The forest grew still, peaceful, almost like it had been holding its breath. As they made their way back through the trees, the mist began to thin. By the time they stepped out into the starlight, the village lights were just starting to twinkle. Again, the trial was over. But as they approached the cheering crowd, Miran noticed someone standing alone in the shadows, watching them with narrow eyes and clenched fists. Not everyone was celebrating, and the journey was far from finished. The stars shimmered above the village as Miran and Vela stepped out of the forest, their clothes damp with mist and their steps slow but steady. In Miran's hand, the heart bloom glowed softly, its red petals pulsing with quiet light. The village square was filled with waiting faces, a crowd of Solari standing in silence as they returned. A low hum of approval rose from the people, but not everyone shared in the welcome. Miran saw him again, the figure he had noticed before, standing just beyond the edge of the circle, arms crossed, his eyes sharp with something close to anger. As Miran and Vela reached the center of the village, the elder stepped forward. He looked at the flower in Miran's hand, then back at him. "You have passed through the whispering forest and returned with the heart bloom," the translator buzzed. "The trial is complete. The bond shall now be honored." Relief rushed through Miran like a breath he'd been holding for hours. He turned to Vila, who gave him a quiet smile. It wasn't wide or proud. It was gentle, as though she too had been carrying a weight that had just now lifted. They had done it. Together. But before the elder could continue, a voice rose from the crowd. Harsh. Cold. "He didn't do it. Alone," it snapped. The villagers turned, and Miran saw the sharp-eyed man step forward. His name, Miran would learn later, was Daran, a respected warrior of the Solari. His eyes flicked from Miran to Vela and back again. She helped him. She led him through the forest. This was not his victory. The crowd murmured. Some nodded. In agreement, others shook their heads. The elder frowned. What is your meaning, Darren? He was meant to prove his strength, Darren said, his voice rising. Instead, he leaned on her. He was not tested, he was guided. How can we call this a true bond? Miran's jaw tightened. He didn't like the tone, but before he could speak, Viola stepped forward. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was clear. He didn't ask me to come. I chose to walk beside him. Because a bond is not about being alone, it is about choosing each other even when the path is hard. Darren laughed once bitterly. Easy words. Viola took a deep breath and looked at the elder. Let me speak the truth. When Miran arrived here, he was scared, lost, and confused. But he didn't run, he listened. He learned. He accepted our ways even when they made no sense to him. He didn't push me away. He didn't treat our traditions like a joke. He respected them, and he respected me. She turned then, facing the crowd. We asked for strength, and he gave us more than that. He gave us understanding. He gave us courage to open the door between worlds. The silence that followed was deep. Then the elder lifted his staff. The bond was never a test of isolation, he said. It was a test of heart. Miran felt the tension in his chest slowly ease. Viola's words still echoed in his ears. He hadn't known what this journey was going to be. He hadn't known what the bond truly meant. But now he did. The elder nodded toward them both. Come forward. Let the bond be sealed beneath the stars. Viola reached for his hand, and Miran took it without hesitation. Together, they stepped onto the raised stone platform where the first light had shone on them just days before. Above them, the stars moved, slow and steady, and then something incredible happened. A single beam of starlight fell from the sky, striking the heart bloom. In Miran's hand, the petals opened wider and a soft warmth spread through the air like a blessing. The villagers gasped in awe. The elder smiled. The stars have spoken. Later that night, after the ceremony ended and the songs faded into the gentle hush of night, Miran and Viola sat alone on a high balcony above the village. The glowing towers shimmered around them and the wind played softly in the trees. It still doesn't feel real, Miran said, looking up at the sky. Viola rested her head on his shoulder. That's how the best things begin. They were quiet for a while, the kind of silence that doesn't need to be filled. Then Viola said softly, Darren will not be the last to question us. I know, Miran replied, but I didn't come here to prove myself to everyone. I came here by accident, and stayed by choice. Viola looked at him. And now? He smiled. Now I stay with purpose. She smiled back, and for a long time. They watched the stars together. Far below, in the quiet corners of the village, Darren stood with others in whispered conversation. Plans, doubts, shadows. They hadn't disappeared. But neither had the light that Miran and Viola had found. Together, this was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of something new.